Tonight on the Late Debate, surviving the cold snap without winter fuel payments. As temperatures plunge, a policy Labour admitted was unpopular gets an icy reception.
I'm only heating downstairs, possibly not upstairs at all. And I will start sleeping downstairs too because it's too cold upstairs.
Also tonight, patients being cared for in a London hospital corridor. Just a temporary measure, claims the Health Secretary.
We will not tolerate corridor care as being acceptable care. We will do everything we can, as fast as we can, to consign corridor care to the history books.
And democracy delayed. Will you be denied a vote in May's local elections? Hello and welcome to the Late Debate. Pensioners facing an uncomfortable few months without the winter fuel allowance have urged Labour to ditch its controversial policy of scrapping the payment. Sir Keir Starmer changed the rules to save money and help those most in need. But the Prime Minister's approach is getting a frosty reception from those worried about getting through the cold snap. Pritpal and her husband are struggling to stay warm. Losing their £300 winter fuel allowance hit them hard. The couple can only afford to heat downstairs at their home in Hounslow. And Pritpal has had cancer, which makes the cold even harder to bear.
I wear lots of layers of clothes to keep myself warm, pair of socks, electric blanket, hot water bottle, and my heating is on as well. And my bill is very, very high. At the moment it's coming up like £200 a month.
Like many London boroughs, Tower Hamlets operates so-called warm hubs where residents can spend part of their day and get a hot drink. This one is at Cubitt Town Library on the Isle of Dogs. But the council run by the left-of-centre Aspire Party has gone further. It's offering its own £175 winter fuel payment.
Tower Hamlets is unique. We have come up with many initiatives and we are trailblazing in that area. So we are the first London council, we are the first council in the country to provide winter fuel payments to our residents.
It's costing the council almost £1 million. Around 5,000 pensioners will get the payment.
It does make a difference between having a meal and putting the heating on. This week we've had extremely cold weather. It would be very hard to be in a house all day with no heating.
The charity Age UK estimates almost 4 out of 5 elderly Londoners living close to the poverty line are affected by the government's decision to restrict the winter fuel allowance.
What our concern is that there are a lot of older people on low incomes who are going to lose the winter fuel payment, and that's what's wrong and that's what's a problem.
Pritpal voted Labour, but is disgusted at the Prime Minister's decision.
We worked all our life. We're working class people. How can you even do this to anybody?
Since this government's been in, have they done anything that's been an advantage for our elderly? I would say no.
Pritpal and her husband have thought about moving to a more energy-efficient house, but say the government's stamp duty change has torpedoed that idea. Joining me to discuss that are the Labour MP for Bexley-Heath and Crayford, Daniel Francis, for the Conservatives, Hornchurch and Upminster MP, Julia Lopez, and for the Liberal Democrats, Richmond Park MP, Sarah Olney. Welcome, all of you. Sarah, as constituency MP, what are your constituents saying about the winter fuel allowance?
Well, it's been enormous concern because for many people, they find themselves just above the threshold for pension credit, which is the measure of kind of eligibility for winter fuel payment in the future. And for many of those people, you know, the bills are going up and up. And we know that energy bills at the moment are higher than they've been historically. And for some people, particularly pensioners who are on a fixed income, suddenly finding that their fuel bills are a much greater part of their outgoings than they used to be, it's making life really, really difficult. So there's a large number of people who are depending on those winter fuel payments who are now finding that they're not eligible for them, and it's causing enormous hardship.
And you're probably hearing the same, Julia?
Yeah, I was hearing the same. There's about 17,000 people in my constituency who had the payment withdrawn. We had a cold weather notice notice go out this week, so it's clear that people are going to be struggling because it's particularly cold at the moment. We've got a lot of pressure on our hospitals, and yeah, people are very, very worried about it.
Daniel, what do you say to your constituents when they say to you, you're a Labour MP, how can you do this to us?
Well, we inherited a financial position with a 22 billion back hole. It's not a position that I came into politics to make a decision like this, but we needed to stabilise the finances. And if you look at what the government's done, it's given household support fund to local authorities. I know in my local authority, that household support fund is helping many of the people like Prit Powell that you saw on your piece. What I would say to Prit Powell as well, given her circumstances, she may well be entitled to attendance allowance given she has cancer. And I know I've been working locally with families like that or people in that position to try and get them the support they need. But the biggest issue is on the triple lock. This government is absolutely committed to the triple lock. That gave an 8.5% increase to pensions last year, 4.1% this year, and that's far above where inflation is running.
Nevertheless, how worried are you that this is going to come back and bite you?
Ultimately, as I say, we will be, at the next election, we'll be looking to say we stabilise the economy, unlike the position we inherited from the Conservatives. And as I say, because the triple lock, pensions are running far above the rate of inflation. Disability benefits this year will increase with inflation at 1.7%. The pension will increase at 4.1%.
Julia, do you accept that you left a bit of a mess?
We left them with the fastest growing economy in the G7, and we've seen from the budget that all the decisions that Labour have made haven't fixed any foundations. They've actually made everything worse. And the winter fuel payment decision is just not something we would have done. It's one of those things that Treasury officials present every so often to chancellors, and we've never taken the decision to make that cut. I know that I feel for Daniel because I know a lot of Labour MPs disagree with the decision and feel very, very uncomfortable about it. It's not something they had been anticipating, and it was probably as much a shock to them as it was to many of us.
Sarah, do you think Labour had no choice?
No, I don't. I mean, Julia's being very disingenuous there. The Tories left an absolute economic catastrophe, and there's no doubt that the economy was in a very bad way, when Labour came into power in July. But there were other decisions that they could have taken, and the Liberal Democrats, we set out in our manifesto, fully costed manifesto, a range of other tax increases and spending choices that they could have made. And there was no need for this cut. And I think the point has been made on a number of occasions. The amount of extra money that's now being spent on pension credit, because obviously there's been a big uptake in that, is pretty much cancelling out the savings from cutting the winter fuel allowance. So, really, I think this is an entirely unnecessary measure and it's causing great hardship.
Is Labour's discomfort over this a political win for you?
I don't think we'd like to call it a political win. I think it's just a bad policy that everybody feels very unhappy about, including Labour MPs. It's just not something we would have done, as I say. And £1.2 billion we think it's saved. I mean, some of the decisions that the Chancellor made at the budget are costing the economy much more than that. And the decisions they've made in relation to borrowing, they are borrowing 140 billion extra than was expected, have had real problems in the markets now. And it's basically eaten up her headroom. So, in a sense, the pain that's being felt on winter fuel is a drop in the ocean when it comes to the bad decisions that they're making.
Daniel, the winter fuel allowance is seen as one of the bumps along the road for Sir Keir Starmer in his first 6 months. Another one this week was the resignation of Tulip Siddiq, the Hampstead and Highgate MP. She stepped down as a Treasury Minister because of her family's involvement in Bangladesh. How difficult has that been for Sir Keir?
Well, ultimately, we were elected to restore faith in politics. If you look at the previous government, 2 prime ministers found guilty of breaking the law. We had a Home Secretary who had to resign for breaking the ministerial code and then was reappointed the following week. And Tulip referred herself. She was found not to have broken the ministerial code, but to take that distraction away from the government, decided to resign.
Nonetheless, she was accused of not bearing in mind the reputational damage that she could do to the government. Her links to her family in Bangladesh were known well before the election. Is this just not another example of an error of judgment by Sir Keir Starmer?
No, I don't believe so. As I say, I believe he holds the highest standards. Unlike the previous Prime Ministers, under Boris Johnson, someone was found of breaking the ministerial code and it was the advisor that had to resign because the Prime Minister refused to actually sack the Secretary of State that had broken the ministerial code. So Keir's holding the highest standards.
Isn't that a point, Julia?
Well, I mean, we made mistakes in government. I don't think we shy from that. But
Priti Patel being brought back?
I mean, this is about the mistakes that Keir Starmer has made. He made some very bad judgments in terms of his ministerial appointments for reasons of political convenience. And the misrepresentation of the Tulip Siddiq resignation is very, very interesting, because they've implied that she was entirely exonerated. That is absolutely not the case. And I think because Keir Starmer knew about some of her links to the Bangladeshi regime and some of the corruption involved when she was appointed. So he's now acting as if it's a complete surprise.
Are you surprised that Sir Keir Starmer gave her the job in the first place?
Well, it's disappointing to see, isn't it, really? I think the British public really expect better from the government, and after so long of a Conservative government that just didn't seem to understand the notion of standards or propriety, to find that the Labour government are now finding themselves in this kind of position is really disappointing. I think Keir Starmer's done the right thing, but you're right. We've known about Tulip Siddique's links to the Bangladeshi regime for a long time, and that ought to have been something that gave Keir Starmer pause before he appointed her as his anti-corruption minister, which I think has added a note of irony to this particular case.
Are you hoping for the same sort of luck with Rachel Reeves?
Look, it's destabilising to lose a Chancellor. So whilst I think that a number of the decisions that she's made are completely wrong, I don't wish bad things to happen to the country. So it'll ultimately be a decision by Keir Starmer. But I think she's made the wrong decisions. But equally, I don't want to see the destabilisation of the country.
Are you confident the government's going to recover from these bumps?
Oh, absolutely. We are fixing the foundations. We've inherited public services in a mess and the worst economic situation you could face. So we're not going to fix that overnight, but absolutely, when we go back to the country at the next election, I think we'll have a good track record and a story to tell.
Briefly, Sarah, you've been an MP for on and off for the best part of a decade. Do you detect that voters are less patient with politicians? They want to see results quicker?
I think there is an element of that, definitely, and I think it is partly because we've had economic difficulties for such a long time, and people are just getting impatient anyway. They want the situation to be better, but I think there is definitely an element by which people have become quite demanding of their MPs, and I think it's also that kind of like, I want you to do the thing that I want you to do. And it's become quite almost like a sort of a one-on-one relationship, and not understanding that the MP is there to represent the whole constituency, as it were. But, I think people are we got sick to death of the Tory government, and we're expecting better from Labour and look forward to seeing it. OK, well, let's talk about another challenge facing the government, because there was an alarming reminder this week of the pressure hospitals face in winter. Whittington Hospital in North London is recruiting nurses to treat patients in corridors. Medics insisted the care would only be used as a last resort, but the nursing union said the job ad was desperate and risked making corridor care the norm. The Health Secretary disagrees.
But I would also say my reaction seeing that advertisement was the same as hers, which is it was proof that corridor care has been normalised. And I want to reassure her, the House, and patients across the country that this government will not accept corridor care as normal care. We will not tolerate corridor care as being acceptable care. We will do everything we can, as fast as we can, to consign corridor care to the history books, and I reassure the staff working in the NHS in these intolerable conditions that we will work with them to deliver the investment and the reform needed to get the NHS back on its feet and make it fit for the future.
Daniel, despite what Wes Streeting said there, is this the new norm?
No, absolutely. I think what Wes said yesterday in the chamber in that statement is there's been 3 times as many flu admissions this winter compared to last winter. We've worked hard, we've resolved the strikes. It's the first time in 3 years where doctors have been back on the front line rather than on the picket line. But we accept that there is a challenge. We're not shirking away from that. And ultimately, we're making that investment, looking at that reform, but we've been honest, the NHS was broken by the Tories and we're doing our utmost to put those foundations back in place to fix it.
As Daniel's not shy of telling us, Labour's going to continue to blame the inheritance from you. Are you responsible for this mess?
Well, look, we added an extra 50,000 nurses in the last Parliament, but there's a fundamental challenge here of an ageing population and trying to deal with also the aftermath of the pandemic, which was a massive hit to the NHS at a time when there were already pressures in terms of the demographics changing. I don't accept Daniel's characterisation of what happened. I mean, certainly in Havering, one of the big things that I campaigned on was trying to open an NHS hub, which has now been delivered, and it means that we can keep as many people as possible out of a hospital setting. We have an ageing Eating Well Centre, and that's something that the Health Secretary is now trying to replicate across the country. It doesn't mean that we haven't stopped having pressures in the hospital. I'm now campaigning to get more investment in the A&E, but we did have a roadmap to sorting some of these challenges out.
Sarah, there is no quick fix, is there?
There's no quick fix, but one of the urgent things we need to get to grips with is social care, because we see so many of the problems in our hospitals are happening because we can't discharge people as quickly as we would like to. So that's why the Liberal Democrats found it really disappointing that when Wes Streeting announced a review into social care, it's not going to be reporting for 3 or 4 years. We urgently need some action on social care now. And the idea that we're going to have to wait possibly till sometime in the next Parliament before we really get serious about fixing the social care issue, frankly, that's really alarming.
OK, let's turn to one other subject briefly, because voters in the home counties hoping to go to the polls this year could be in for a shock. A number of councils, including Thurrock as well as Essex and Surrey county councils, have asked to postpone their elections because of the government's planned shake-up of local authorities. But the reorganisation has infuriated the leader of Reform UK.
They're going to get rid of district and county councils, replace them with a set of unitaries, destroy the concept of the county, and then put a mayor in who will have power over planning and transport. Who are they going to work with? It is a complete denial of democracy to sort of 9 or 10 million people in this country. And they're all doing it because they're scared of us. It's as simple as that. I think the whole thing is a disgrace. I'm really angry about this.
Daniel, there are no plans to reform local government in London. That was done in 2000. But what's this all about? Why does local government outside of London need changing?
Well, we were elected with a commitment for that further devolution for mayors and to get rid of inefficiency in local government. You know, if you look where I represent in Crayford, I have constituents in my patch who have one local council in Bexley. They understand how that works. On the other side of the road, in many cases, there are 2 councils, Dartford Borough Council, Kent County Council. That causes confusion. It also causes inefficiency. And that's the changes we're bringing forward.
Julia, you're like Daniel, you've been in local government. Do you see the need for reform?
Well, I think there is a case to make for streamlining how councils work. But I'm not sure about the delaying of democracy. It's something that we saw during the pandemic in London for understandable reasons. I think you should only ever think about doing that in circumstances that justify it. So, you know, I have some sympathy with the case that's being made, but as a London MP, I'm afraid it's not one of those things that affects us. We already have our mayor, and I have very strong feelings about how well or otherwise he's performing. But yes.
Well, let's talk briefly about that, because the idea is to give mayors power in the same sort of way that the regional the mayors in big cities like Sadiq Khan have power. Is it a good idea?
Well, are you asking
Sarah or Julia?
I mean, I think, you know, a lot of the government's plans for their devolution have not yet been properly fleshed out. And I think that's one of the major concerns about delaying elections. I know, for example, in Surrey, if the elections get delayed, by the time the new settlement has kind of come into play, they might not have elections again until 2028. And that's a very long time for voters. And there are many voters in Surrey, in particular, who want to have their say on how the Conservatives are running their county council. We've seen huge underperformance in many of the services that Surrey County Council deliver, and voters will want to have their say on that. And the other bit that's not been fleshed out is, for example, Woking Borough Council has been left with a huge pile of debt from the outgoing Conservative administration, and there is no clarity about what happens to Woking's debt when it gets merged with other Surrey districts or, you know, becomes part of a wider organisation. And obviously the surrounding areas are very, very concerned about that. And there's been very little information about exactly what's going to happen.
Julia, you heard Nigel Farage there. The charge is that Conservative councils are running scared, which is why they're agreeing to the postponement.
I don't think we're running scared. I just think that there's, as Sarah says, there are various different issues that need to be thrashed out. And this is being imposed from Whitehall. And so that leaves a challenge for those councils as to how they deal with some of the challenges that get thrown up as to what powers are going where and who is doing what. So I think that it's really a practical consideration rather than anybody running scared.
Daniel, you're shaking your head
I
there.
am shaking my head. It's not true, ultimately. You know, councils have brought their own plans forward. The Minister is now considering them, and the Minister will agree them by the end of the month. But the only decisions about deferral elections are where councils have asked for that, and that will be considered. And on Julia's other point, there were 24 councils between 2019 and 21 under the Conservatives that did this, that requested deferral, 9 of them in 2019 prior to the pandemic. So this was common practice under the previous government, and this government isn't doing this for political reasons. It's seeking those opportunities from
Don't
local
governments do everything for
forward.
political reasons?
Well, ultimately, most of the councils in question aren't Labour-run councils. They are councils across the country that have come forward with their plans for reorganisation, and it would be a waste of public money to hold elections now when they may be required again in a short period for the reorganisation of the council.
Sarah, the Lib Dems were presumably hoping to clean up in Surrey after the results of the general election when you took seats off the Tories.
Well, yeah, I think in Surrey the Conservatives aren't running scared of reform. They're running scared of the Lib Dems, frankly. We took a lot of seats in Surrey at the general election, and we're still very much looking forward, hoping that the Surrey elections will go ahead and that we plan to make gains.
It might be that the Conservatives are worried about Nigel Farage, but Labour would be quite happy if there wasn't a test of public confidence in the Labour government, wouldn't they?
As I say, this was a common practice. 24 local authorities between 2019 and 2021 did this. And it's not about that. It's about trying to save public money, working with those councils, like those neighbouring councils to my constituency in Kent, where this has been requested, trying to work out a timeline and what that reorganisation looks like. And we'll be very clear in the next few weeks how that's going to be going forward. Some of the councils will be holding elections, but that's going to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
But isn't it quite convenient for Labour if there isn't a test of public opinion?
But as I say, there will be in some places where the government agrees with local authorities that they will still have elections, but in some places there won't be.
Julia, just briefly, we've had a mayor in London now for the best part of 2.5 decades. Does it prove that the idea of one directly elected person in charge of local government is actually a good thing?
Well, I think it depends if you assess the record of the Conservative mayor or the Labour one. I think there is a case to make for streamlining certain services in London, particularly the policing, for fire brigade and so on. But there is a question also about the performance of Sadiq Khan. I think he has not been good in relation to crime in London, and certainly my constituents are furious about the way in which he's handled transport, where you always see these challenges in relation to him not understanding outer London and the problems with ULEZ and not having our fair share of infrastructure.
Julia, I'm sure you probably had a different view when Boris Johnson was mayor, but for the moment, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Thank you to my guests, Daniel Francis, Julia Lopez and Sarah Olney. We're back next month. Until then, thank you for watching and good night.